Calvin Cambridge, a teenage boy, lives in Chesterfield Orphanage with his best friends, Murphy and Reg. While playing basketball in the front yard, a group of bullies led by Ox challenges him to a match for his basketball jersey. Despite his friend's advice, Calvin wants to take on the challenge as his favorite basketball player. The orphanage director, Stan Biddleman, encourages the kids to sell candy to raise funds. One night, they attend a Los Angeles Knights game and sell candies outside the arena. After the game, Calvin approaches the Knights coach, who offers him a $20 bill for the charity. Calvin refuses. Calvin excitedly runs to Murphy to tell him about the 4 basketball tickets offered by Wagger. Next day, a group of couples seeks to adopt a child from the orphanage. Calvin is hopeful, but realizes the parents prefer younger children. Later, they receive a box of donated clothes from the thrift store. Calvin tries on a pair of shoes and asks the nun about them. The nun says they belong to a famous basketball player. When he checks the shoes, he finds Michael B. Jordan's initials. The shoes hang from the power cable. In a rainstorm at night, Calvin wakes up, Murph and Reg fetch shoes from the cable, and they venture outdoors in the hard rain. Kevin climbs a tree near the cable and reaches for his shoes when lightning strikes, causing him to fall to the ground. Despite being unharmed, he notices a strange force in the shoes, but doesn't think much of it. The children sell candies in the arena again the next day. Kevin, Murray, and Reg receive 4 tickets as promised by the coach. Ox and his friends are jealous. Bullies threaten to reveal that they bought the seats with charity money to prevent him from causing trouble. Calvin lends Ox a ticket, and the 4 enjoy the game between the Knights and the Minnesota Timberwolves. During halftime, the team's star player, Tracy Reynolds, and a coach host a show to attract more fans. One lucky audience member will have the chance to meet with Tracy, surprising the group. Calvin's ticket number is chosen for the contest. Ox tries to steal it, but Calvin tricks him and runs to the front. Tracy lets Calvin score the first round to engage the audience, but he must stop him or be humiliated. Calvin scores a slam dunk despite Tracy's best efforts. The next day, Knights coaches approach Biddleman to let Calvin play for them for a day. The director initially refuses, then accepts the offer of money. Friends are thrilled for Calvin. Ox is enraged since Calvin couldn't defeat him before obtaining the shoes. The youngsters believe the shoes are magical and decide to keep it a secret to prevent theft, but Ox hears them. The next day, Calvin enters the Knights' changing room, causing Tracy to be annoyed. His teammates warn him that a rival is coming for his throne. Calvin is given a Knights jersey and new shoes, but he asks the coach to let him wear his old shoes. Calvin's presence is a publicity stunt, as his popularity has grown exponentially since the last match. He asks the coach for a chance to play in the second half, but the coach is skeptical and allows him to play despite not wearing his lucky shoes. Calvin feels apprehensive and calls a timeout, changing into his old shoes. Upon returning, he is more confident and helps his team catch up to the opponent's points, ultimately winning. After the match, he signs a contract to play for the team for the rest of the tournament. While packing up to leave, Biddleman confronts him, urging him to be cautious of adopters who only care about money. The coach assigns Tracy and Calvin to the same room. The kid gets to eat wherever he wants and takes full advantage of it. When Calvin returns with his date, the room is trashed with half-eaten food. He had expected to spend the night together with his date, but instead they end up taking care of Calvin, who is sick. The boys go to sleep late at night, but even then Tracy can hardly fall asleep because of Calvin's snoring. The following day, they have an important match, but Tracy is tired. Calvin unknowingly reveals to the coach that they stayed up late at night. The coach warns to suspend Tracy if he misses curfew one more time. Starting that day, Calvin plays several games with the Knights and helps them win all of them. The opponents do not know what to expect when they play with the kid and are surprised by his skills. He gets to go to several press conferences and makes a lot of money. With the money, he buys a bunch of gifts for everyone in the orphanage. He also wins the NBA slam dunk competition and becomes the most talented rising basketball star. One night, Calvin is talking to Murph about his new life and all the fun he has had playing in the NBA. A jealous Ox hears them and attacks Calvin, trying to take his shoes away. The fight stops when Biddleman intervenes and scolds Ox for hitting his friends. He doesn't want Calvin to get hurt now that he makes so much money off him. In a hotel, Tracy buys sleeping pills and allergy medications to get a good night's sleep before a match. Calvin joins him for the ride, much to Tracy's annoyance. While While on the way, Calvin asks about Tracy's parents, discovering that Tracy has a father he doesn't talk to. However, Calvin is adamant about having good parents. Tracy claims he doesn't want to discuss his family and drives, but misses the curfew and takes a sleeping pill instead of an allergy pill. He falls asleep before starting the car and drives back to the hotel, hitting several things. The next day, he is suspended for a game. Tracy thanks Calvin for absorbing the heat to save him. After spending time with Calvin, Tracy develops a liking for him. When Calvin returns to the orphanage, numerous people express interest in adopting him. Murray is jealous of Calvin's desire for adult adoption, so Biddleman selects the worst parents and arranges a meeting with them. Calvin avoids grown-ups and stays at the orphanage. He meets Tracy in his house unexpectedly and is mesmerized by the size of the player's mansion when questioned why he is there. Calvin informs Tracy about his son's concern over poor parenting and a geometry test he must take tomorrow to address his issues. Tracy invites Murph over, teaches him geometry in a fun way, and they playfully throw paint at each other. Murph joins later and forgets his argument with Calvin. The next day, Calvin and his friends discuss the difficulty of finding good parents. Calvin suggests that Tracy help them find good parents. The next day, Calvin meets with Tracy's father and brings him to Tracy's house. The player is furious at Calvin for invading his privacy. They get into a massive argument about the matter. The next day, the Knights have a match against their biggest opponents, the Toronto Raptors. But Calvin and Tracy have still not resolved their differences. Because of this, they lose the match. The coach scolds the team for degrading their performances in such a crucial game. Now they only have one last match, which will decide if they will enter the playoffs or not. The next day, a couple comes to the orphanage asking to adopt Calvin. He is skeptical after several failed meetings, but Biddleman urges him to give them a chance. He makes Calvin wear new shoes, telling him if he looks presentable, they will want to adopt him even more. Before leaving, Calvin hands his lucky shoes to Murph, asking him to guard them with his life. To test the shoes, Murph wears them and tries to play like Calvin, but he fails. He concludes that they do not fit him and continues talking to a picture of his mother. Ox and his friends threaten him to tell them about the shoes. When he refuses, they take him to Biddleman, who burns the only picture of his mother that Murph has. With no way out, Murph tells them where the shoes are. Following that, Biddleman meets his associates and bets $100,000 against the Knights in the next game. Since he has hidden the lucky shoes, he is sure that Calvin will be horrible in the game. Calvin goes on a dinner with his potential parents, but he doesn't seem to fit in. In the meantime, Tracy meets his father and reconciles with him. He misses Calvin terribly and talks to him before their next match. He wants to adopt the kid but refrains from telling him that after meeting the couple who he went to see yesterday. 20 minutes before the game, Murph calls Calvin and tells him about the shoes. Calvin rushes back to the orphanage to retrieve them. The kids help him to tie up Biddleman and ask him where the shoes are. Ox goes against the group and tries to help him, but he changes his mind. After Biddleman insults Calvin, he retrieves his shoes from the safe and returns them to him. Everyone then rides scooters back to the arena, but Biddleman escapes and calls his associate to prevent Calvin from entering. The men stop him, but the kids stall them and let Calvin in as a last resort. Biddleman blocks Calvin from continuing, but he hits him with his scooter and arrives at the game. His team is far behind, but he quickly catches up. He is tackled during the game, destroying his shoes. Nervous Calvin feels his scoring ability is tied to his shoes and cannot score without them. Tracy encourages the youngster that his true talent lies within him, rather than the shoes that gave him confidence. After helping his team win, Calvin decides not to renew his contract and returns to the orphanage, which has changed since Biddleman's departure. In the story, Tracy wants to adopt a child and asks Calvin if he wants to be his son. Calvin accepts, but only if Murphy comes with him. Reg, their friend, is also adopted by a different family. In the end, Calvin and Murphy playfully fight with Tracy in their new room.